a man suddenly found himself waking to the shout of the words, "Eternal life." When he looked around, he realized he was in an unfamiliar place. Chen, who's once an archaeology student, suddenly sat in a mythological arena. Abruptly, his childhood friend Hans told him to line up because today was Divine Awakening Day. But Chen was clearly confused about what the Awakening Day was. 100 years ago, the mythological arena had descended upon the continent, and gods from various nations were resurrected along with it. Once a human turned 16, they could use the Awakening Stone to summon a god. Those who summoned a god gained power and fought in the arena. However, if they summoned the wrong name, there was only one outcome. They would be struck down by that god and die as their bodies faded into the wind. Unfortunately, Chinese civilization records vanished, and their sages' names were forgotten. Back in the present, the city lord finally arrived at the arena. He announced the beginning of the ceremony, and the crowd erupted in excitement. However, Chen saw this world as dangerous, because failed summoners turned to dust. Soon, a girl appeared, and Hans recognized her as the one ranked first in the national exams. This girl was Yana, and was the daughter of Fred, the top swordsman, so he believed that with her background, she was bound to summon a powerful god. Moreover, he feared Xia would lose again, so he hoped Yana could awaken a strong god. Hearing this also made Chen feel the same. Meanwhile, Yana stepped forward as the crowd hoped she would awaken a high-tier god. The moment she touched the crystal, it immediately lit up a blue aura. The city lord saw this and believed a high-tier god was about to appear. Just then, 3 powerful gods were reflected within the crystal. Chen's eyes widened the moment he saw them, since the images of the gods were exactly the same as the ones from his previous life. Like him, the others were also stunned by the sight of these divine figures. Soon after, Yana invoked the god of death, feared for blood-soaked battles. With that, she finally humbly requested the presence of the god of war Bai. However, Chen was confused since Bai was from Qin dynasty, while Red Cliffs was Han centuries later. Hearing this, Hans urged him not to question Yana, who's the top scorer. Unfortunately, the others heard him and mocked him as ignorant. Chen then thought they were pathetic, believing modern civilization had collapsed, especially now that people had already forgotten their own history. Meanwhile, the city lord happily announced Yana and Bai had 40% compatibility. The crowd quickly praised her, saying it was natural for a sword immortal's daughter to do it. The city lord said Yana had a bright future but must grow, so for now they relied on her father. However, Yana's attention was completely elsewhere. The city lord finally noticed that she was staring at something, so he followed her gaze and wondered what she was trying to do. He then saw the emperor god, and wondered if she meant to summon a weak human god. People also speculated it might be Emperor Zong of the Tang dynasty, though records were scarce. However, Chen knew Tang emperors wore yellow garments and never black, so he kept watching the god and speculating about his true identity. But his thoughts were cut short when an old man shouted for everyone to stop. The old man then said it was the first emperor god in a century, though history had many emperors. So this old man Yuan, who's the head of Tian Academy, warned against reckless choices. The city lord also urged Yana to give up as she could not fail. Hearing this, Yana fell silent and looked at the god standing before her. After that, she said if she walked away, this top-tier god would vanish. Even so, Yuan told her that they could not risk their future top-tier fighting force. So he ordered Tian Academy to use 10 years of fortune to anchor the emperor's soul. After his subordinate agreed, a phoenix quickly flew into the sky. Afterward, Yuan said the top-tier god might be Emperor Zong, and it was vital to Xia. After all, they had already lost to the Kura nation in the first round of the Godly War. In the second round, the Kura nation had won again, so he warned another loss meant ceding land, and without a top-tier god their chances were slim. Hence, he asked who would dare to step forward and try. But the students feared the god was not Emperor Zong, and they might die. Suddenly, a student declared Kyoto Academy would prevail and he would attempt. A student from Chunyu Academy also stepped forward to try. Soon, more voices volunteered one after another. However, one person raised his hand, claiming the god's origin differed from the dean's view. Chen then declared he's from Jinling Academy and stepped up, but many doubted him. Hans even warned Chen of death, but Chen ignored him. Yuan also saw his confidence and wondered if he knew the emperor's past. Yet after reviewing all the records, the only emperor who matched the known traits was Zong. But he still let Chen try, and this surprised the city lord. So Yuan reasoned no one should block a Xia citizen's sincere heart. Meanwhile, the Kura nation mocked Xia's actions, calling them ignorant and weak. With that, they called Chen a monkey while urging him to go ahead. Chen ignored them and placed his hand on the crystal, which immediately turned red. When the red light spread, the crowd suspected Chen had awakened a high-tier god. Yana was equally astonished, for the crystal's radiance was unmistakably red. Meanwhile, Kura Nation said orange was the highest aura, while Shia's strongest god only had purple. At the same time, India Nation said only they and Greece produced orange aura gods, while Korea Nation doubted Shia's worth and suspected the crystal malfunctioned. However, the city lord was still confused, so Yuan explained that this was the aura of a triple S-tier god. He added known auras were white, green, blue, purple, and orange, but above them was red, which only God in the Vatican possessed. Hearing this then made the city lord wonder if Shia once had a triple S-tier god. Meanwhile, Chen thought this god exceeded triple S, since even if other gods reached the triple S rank, they could never compare to him. Yana, on the other hand, doubted Chen could summon a triple S god due to his poor exam. At the same time, the city lord asked what deity the triple S god was. In response, Yuan speculated the powerful axe wielder might be Jing. But Chen knew Xing was headless, so this god could not be him, and Yuan fell silent. Chen then thought that the myths of Xia had faded for far too long. As he felt this was his purpose for coming, he finally faced the heaven and earth creator before him. With great respect, he humbly called upon the first god of creation, Pangu himself. Upon hearing that it was the creator god, the people of Kura were completely stunned. The people of Shia also marveled that Chen awakened and identified a triple S god. Meanwhile, Chen gazed at Pangu in awe. After all, Pangu opened the heavens and became all things. Because of this, he knew he was undoubtedly the most supreme god in existence. Suddenly, his system panel appeared, showing he had 1% compatibility with Pangu. Meanwhile, at the Temple of Gods, one of the attendants found himself facing an unbelievable situation. Since the creator and leader of all gods, Pangu had suddenly appeared in Shia's Temple of Gods. The attendant then rushed to the stairs to ring the fate bell and announce the event. As soon as he reached it, he swung the mallet with all his strength. A deep and powerful sound echoed throughout the surroundings after it. Hearing the bell, Sword Immortal Fred doubted it, but his assistant confirmed its 9 rings. Yuan also rejoiced, since he knew 9 rings meant they awakened a supreme god. Just like him, Yana was shocked, since the strongest god they had only rung 3 times. Meanwhile, Emperor Toku of Kura Nation grew furious that a boy from Shia had awakened a supreme god. He questioned Matt's ability to face Chen, and Matt replied Chen is still a newcomer, so he could destroy Chen and his god to stop him before he grew stronger. With that, Toku ordered his men to initiate a named god war. He even gritted his teeth and declared they could not let Chen live. On the other side, Chen continued to feel the overwhelming power radiating from Pangu. He knew that a triple S-tier god was the peak for most deities, but not the limit of Pangu's power. After all, Pangu's body became all things, but with his current power, he had to focus on the emperor god before him. Unexpectedly, the ground shook as the Kura Nation declared a god war against Chen. In the next instant, the platform beneath him rose into the air before everyone's eyes. Soon after, Chen found himself transported into a different dimension. The city lord, Yuan, and Yana were then surprised to see Chen transported immediately. Because of this sudden turn of events, both the city lord and Yuan cursed in frustration. Yana, who also felt the same anger, muttered that it was truly an insidious tactic. Meanwhile, the Kura Nation audience was delighted to see Shia's people panic in anger. Toku also watched and thought the god war would secure victory and eliminate Shia's prodigy early. After all, he knew very well that Shia's Sword Immortal was no easy opponent. But as long as Chen died, the 10 years of fortune spent would be worth it. At the same time, Fred learned Kura spent 10 years of fortune to start the arena early against Chen, where god wars strike the blessed, leaving even prodigies as helpless fledglings inside it. His assistant also said it allowed Kura to target Shia's prodigy in the name of god war. Hearing this, Fred gritted his teeth and vowed to crush Kura next year. A few minutes later, Chen faced Matt, who thought the god war was exaggerated. He even boasted he could tear Chen apart, including Sword Immortal Fred. On the other hand, Chen silently figured he couldn't summon Pangu, but the Emperor God could. However, Matt mistook his silence for fear and thought he'd lost courage. Yet, when he looked more closely, he was startled. Chen was actually smiling as he remarked that his snake's head would make an excellent stew. Matt was furious by this and vowed to behead Chen and feed his god. Not long after, the host named Venus arrived, announcing Kura had won 2 matches already. So if Kura won the 3rd match, Shia must surrender half its people and fortune. Meanwhile, Chen read the rules and found victory meant survival while defeat meant death. So he reminded Matt that the fight was more than winning, and it was life itself, but Matt simply sneered smugly in response. After a while, Venus asked if they understood the rules to begin the battle, and both confirmed. Matt's information then appeared saying he's at S level, with Auroch at SS. Next came Chen, whose status was unknown, but his awakened god was the SSS Pangu. After announcing this, Venus declared the third match and ordered the gods summoned. Matt stepped forward first and placed his hand on the god stone. Watching this, Toku muttered, "Matt's S level matched Auroch perfectly." As Auroch emerged, Matt declared they'd already won after killing 2 gods of Xia Nation. At that moment, Chen also began his summoning. However, the city lord and Yuan were surprised by what they saw, since, instead of the expected red aura, Chen was surrounded only by the unawakened gods. Yuan then thought of Pangu's absence due to low compatibility, and this made others doubt Chen. Meanwhile, Chen gazed at the emperor that must never be forgotten. Seeing him stare at the emperor, the others feared it was too risky to choose him. So Yuan hinted to Chen it might be Emperor Zong, while Yana guessed Emperor Zhu. However, Chen did not respond to their guesses. Instead, he stepped forward, invoking the Chen Emperor who conquered all under heaven. After saying this, he bowed and addressed the figure as Zhang, who's the founder of Xia. The moment he spoke the name, Zhang's body lit up with a brilliant orange aura. When he finally moved, the arena gasped that Chen had called a SS god. Seeing this, the city lord rejoiced that their nation had been blessed. However, Yuan remarked that it was unfortunate because Zhang was a human god. In general, the power of human gods was considered weaker than demon gods of the same rank. Because of this, he judged the human god inferior to the 8-headed serpent. As the battle began, Matt mocked Chen for summoning a frail human god instead of Pangu. He even laughed loudly and shouted that a human god was nothing more than a mortal. Chen ignored him and bowed to Zhang, while saying future generations may have forgotten him. But from this day, he vowed that Zhang's legacy as first emperor would never be hidden again. He then spoke of Zhang's legacy, where he unified script and states. Zhang's deeds also ensured Xia's land stayed united and safe behind the Great Wall. As Chen spoke of Zhang's legacy, a majestic dragon suddenly appeared. At the same time, Chen's system showed his bond with Zhang had risen to 60%. Meanwhile, Yana was astonished and questioned whether such an emperor truly existed. Matt, however, continued insisting that Zhang was nothing more than a human god. Hearing this, Zhang asked who he was, and Chen said he was a foreigner against Xia. Zhang quickly grew furious by this, and declared that all who offended Xia must die. However, the Kura people only laughed and dismissed his grand words. Matt also sneered, and remarking Zhang's imperial authority was indeed undeniable. Auroch then scoffed, saying he never expected a human god to challenge a true one. He even said he expected a great battle but found only a small human. Hearing this, Zhang slowly raised his hand. A sword began to form within his grasp. As he held the weapon, he declared that his only regret in life was that he had never slain a god. So he raised the sword toward the sky and announced that it was Qin. The Kura people saw this and wondered if he truly meant to fight. Meanwhile, the audience from Stick Country thought it looked pitiful. Scylla's spectators also doubted Zhang could fight a god with a mortal body. On the other hand, Auroch said he's still a meat worth eating, so he told Zhang to prepare. He then launched his assault, promising to show Zhang the gap between gods. In the next instant, one of Auroch's massive heads lunged toward Zhang's position. Toku saw this and believed the battle was already over and that the emperor was dead. Some spectators also began leaving, while mocking Xia for pitting a human god against a true one. However, a sudden flash of golden light erupted on the stage. Zhang had swung his sword, and the blade cut cleanly through Auroch's head. As a result, the severed head fell heavily onto the arena floor. Toku and the others who witnessed the scene were stunned. On the other side, Yana was overjoyed to see him sever Auroch's head with a single strike. Even Auroch was shocked and asked how Zhang achieved it without divine power. Zhang raised his sword and said it was their chi refining technique. He also explained the art was crafted by Xia's cultivators and it challenged heaven. Hearing this, Yuan was deeply shocked that Xia's forebears created earth-shattering power. However, Auroch mocked the technique and said Zhang had severed just one of his many heads. Moreover, his body could regenerate countless limbs, and he was immortal, so he asked how a mere human god like him could possibly hope to stop him. He even shouted that mortals must kneel, and that Zhang would never reincarnate. Zhang replied that losing would betray his people, but he had never known defeat. These words enraged Auroch, and he immediately launched another attack. Zhang responded by striking and cutting off another of Auroch's heads. However, the severed head quickly regenerated, and Auroch urged him to give up. Seeing this, the people of Xia began doubting their god's chances of winning. Zhang himself was also surprised by Auroch's endless regeneration. Nevertheless, he attacked relentlessly after sensing Auroch's gradual decline. At the same time, Auroch counterattacked fiercely while urging him to give up. One of his strikes landed heavily on Zhang, sending him crashing into the ground. Yet Jiang forced himself to kneel upright and gripped his sword tightly. Seeing their forefather bleed, Shia's people cried out in grief. Yuan also urged the city lord to prepare for defeat to stop Zhang's endless sacrifice. Meanwhile, Zhang's strength waned even though victory felt near each time. Yet at that moment, he felt the nation's aura behind him, so he rose to his feet and declared that all the land under heaven belonged to him. As soon as he spoke those words, the divine presence of Shia's people began to awaken, including Bai, who's the primary god summoned by Yana. Not long afterward, the gods of Shia began descending into the arena. With this, Zhang successfully awakened the Great Qin divine armor. He immediately commanded the divine spirits to kill Auroch, and they all rushed forward at once. Matt was then stunned that he could summon many divine spirits, but he refused defeat. He then turned his attention to himself, and remembered that he was still part of the battle. Then he looked at Chen thinking he was foolish despite his talent. He then proceeded to unleash magic, knowing the Guardian's death meant defeat. After that, he appeared behind Chen with a knife in his hand. Yana and Yuan immediately noticed this and shouted for Chen to dodge. Chen reacted in time and avoided the knife that was aimed at his head. He then grabbed Matt's arm and slammed his entire body into the ground. Seeing this, the people of Xia realized that Chen as guardian of Pangu was formidable. As they suspected, Pangu was still Chen's main god even with the weakest bond, so his body had already become as strong as stone. After a moment, Matt acknowledged Chen's strength, but judged him ignorant of magic. So as he began casting his magic, he mocked Chen and called him a piece of trash. He then created powerful clones and launched a coordinated assault on him. However, Chen calmly grabbed both of their feet in midair. Then he slammed the two bodies into each other with great force. After that, he admitted that Matt truly was a double S-level guardian because his strikes were indeed powerful. Meanwhile, in the audience stands of Xia, the girls began cheering loudly for him. On the other side, the people of Kura feared Auroch's defeat, though some denied it. Toku himself also found it hard to believe both Zhang and Chen were so strong. At that moment, Auroch was being relentlessly attacked by the gathered deities. Amid the chaos, Zhang watched the battle while Bai guarded him. Not long afterward, Auroch suddenly began asking for offerings. After he said this, the souls of the Kura audience began melting away. Auroch used this sacrifice to strengthen his body, which had been on the verge of destruction. With that sacrifice, he finally managed to regenerate once again. Meanwhile, Chen stepped on Matt and knew if he died his god would vanish to the heavens. However, looking at Auroch, he knew the serpent must die first to end it. On the other side, Auroch claimed Zhang faced both him and Kura's people. Zhang responded by condemning him for sacrificing his own people. He also revealed the citizens' souls were sacrifices fueling his strength. Hearing this, the people of Kura were stunned and quickly fell into panic. Zhang then continued saying that, through hardship, he gained skill. With those words, he rose into the air before the gathered deities to turn them into dragons. His power surged and flowed into them, allowing them to awaken the immortal Qi technique. At that very moment, Yana felt her resonance with her god rising fast. Citizens of Xia also felt strength awakening within, and even the blind regained sight. Meanwhile, Zhang coughed blood but still wished his people would endure like dragons. Hearing these words, the people of Xia wept at their forefathers' resolve. He even solemnly declared that he was willing to do anything for them. Observers from Hawk Nation then noted Auroch fed on lives, while Zhang gave his own. The people of America also marveled and admired the power of the Eastern civilization. At that moment, Zhang held his head high, calling for Qin's celestial soldiers. The gathered deities immediately bowed and replied that they were present. With the last of his strength, Zhang raised his hand and ordered them to finish Auroch. The deities quickly turned around, with Bai leading them into battle. Seeing this, Auroch was startled, but the deities moved swiftly and continuously sliced into his body. Some of them surrounded his heads while others stabbed him. He then desperately once again demanded more sacrifices. Kura's citizens quickly weakened as Auroch drained their strength. Even Toku felt the drain and realized their elites were being consumed. The citizens then mourned and believed their nation could not endure this. Soon, the other Kura spectators condemned Auroch's endless hunger for offerings. Hence, they all shouted together for Auroch to die. At that moment, Zhang raised his sword once more. He pointed it at Auroch and declared even his people had abandoned him. And with the support of the dragon spirits, he cornered him and delivered a final strike. Auroch's head fell heavily to the ground, and he was declared dead. Seeing this, Chen realized that there was no longer any reason to keep Matt alive, so he ended the fight by stomping heavily on Matt's neck. Moments later, Matt was also pronounced dead. Venus then appeared to announce the result of the battle. With Chen's triumph, the tally now stood at 2-1 between Kura and Xia Nation. The citizens of Xia were still stunned that Chen succeeded. It also shocked Yuan to see Zhang overcome a god, while the city lord honored Chen's victory. But their moment ended as Venus proclaimed a brief intermission before the next battle. Meanwhile, Zhang remained standing quietly in the arena, yet it was clear that he was breathing heavily and exhausted. The citizens of Xia noticed this and worried why he seemed so weak. Yuan explained that it was because Zhang had very few believers left in their nation. Because of that, the battle had greatly wounded him. Chen also saw Zhang's form fading and rushed to check on him. Zhang then said he might not continue fighting, but still had a dream to share. So as his body turned to ashes, he declared his wish for all life to live in peace. Yuan then thought of how gods draw power from followers, yet Zhang, with almost none, gave his all. Hearing this, the others admitted they had disrespected their forefather. But the system told Chen that Zhang could still be summoned once belief in him grew. Chen was clearly surprised by this revelation. He also found that calling Zhang raised their resonance, and his bond with Pangu heightened. Thus, he realized more divine summons might one day grant the power to call Pangu. But he assured others first that Zhang would return once honored again. The crowd was overjoyed, and Yuan decreed Zhang's achievements be written into history. At the same time, Fred finally arrived and praised Chen for defeating Auric. However, his secretary suddenly used her blood to activate the divine arena. The system declared Mary from Kura had issued a duel against him. Hearing this, Fred was shocked to learn she had been a Kura spy all along, but she just calmly explained that she had waited 10 years for this chance to kill him. With that being said, she declared that Xia would belong to the Kura nation. Fred then drew his sword and told her that this is her fault. Meanwhile, Yuan's subordinate reported the situation to him. He then informed them Fred could not reach the arena, so a replacement was needed. Upon hearing this, they denounced Kura's pettiness, but Fred's absence left them in crisis. Since with 2 masters killed by Auric, Fred alone had kept victory over Kura alive. But Yuan knew that the 4th battle was about to begin, so he chose to fight next, as he believes Chen is exhausted from the last battle. However, Chen immediately refused. He firmly declared that he would win, and asked Yuan to allow him to go. Hearing this, Yuan sternly ordered him not to force himself. Hans also cautioned him against continuing, and Yana argued Yuan was likely to win. However, he simply turned and looked at them. He then began speaking about a dream, and a flame suddenly sparked beneath them. The flame slowly circled around the group, leaving everyone in awe. Chen continued, saying that in his dream, he met an ancient god who comforted him, and when he finally woke up, he had inherited the hidden legacy of Xia. Hearing this, everyone was clearly surprised. But Yuan thought of Rui, who attained life's path, and a monk who reached immortality. So, he knew the path could be grasped, which explained Chen's knowledge of forgotten gods. With that being said, he fell silent as he watched Chen, yet he still reminded Chen that he has more experience. The city lord also agreed he didn't need to sacrifice himself. However, he suddenly looked up and called the phoenix deity behind Yuan. Yuan looked up and was shocked, since Chen had awakened the blazing phoenix connected to his deity. The others also stared in disbelief, as Chen's words renewed Yuan's ancient phoenix. Once again, they were astonished that Chen seemed to know so many hidden myths. Because of this, Yuan finally agreed, and told Chen to rest before the battle. However, Chen's attention soon turned toward Yana. He began calling upon General Bai, whose fame would be passed down through the ages. As he recalled Bai sweeping 6 kingdoms, Bai's spirit rose behind Yana. After finishing this, he quietly stepped away, while Yana watched his retreating figure. Everyone then marveled at Chen's ability, though they thought it would cut his life short, since in their eyes, Chen was lighting up the future of the Xia nation with his own life. Later in the arena, Venus announced the coming battle between Xia and Kura. She also announced the fighters were set, and their information would appear. As Chen's profile appeared, she announced he would again represent Xia. After that, she introduced Momo of Kura Nation, who quickly bowed to greet Chen. Meanwhile, in the Kura stand, spectators mocked Xia Nation for sending Chen again. Toku also felt confident since his spy had acted, and Kura's deity was famed for bewitchment. So with Momo representing them, he was certain that Xia would be defeated. At that moment, Momo stood calmly in the arena. Many of the men from Xia could not help but admit how beautiful she was. However, Yuan's concern deepened since this guardian was unknown. After a while, Momo placed her hand on the summoning stone to call her deity, and as soon as she did, the countdown began at 50 seconds. While Momo chose her deity, the crowd noticed Chen had yet to summon, so they shouted that only a minute remained and urged him to summon quickly. Just then, Momo's deity finally appeared. It was none other than Tama herself. When Tama appeared, Eagle Nation's crowd was entranced by her divine beauty. The people from Sindhu also felt their hearts flutter. But the citizens of Xia were unfamiliar with her, and hoped Chen stays focused. Chen, however, simply smiled calmly. After all, he anticipated Tama, who's the leader of Kura's 3 demon deities, and since he already knew her identity, he saw no reason to wait, so he stepped forward and placed his hand on the crystal. Momo and Tama both watched as his crystal lit up with a blue aura. When the summoning finished, he turned around to see his deity. Standing before him was the heavenly marshal Kurt. The city lord was stunned to see him summon a demon deity. Hans also reminded Chen his deities were human, and Yana added that his main god controls his summon. So, if someone attempted to summon a different type, the result would be death. Despite the warnings, Chen bowed toward the god before him and welcomed him. The Kura crowd thought Chen was doomed like past demon summoners. Toku also thought the demon was his last resort. However, the hog standing before them suddenly transformed into a human. The Kura audience was immediately confused by the sight. On the other side, Xia celebrated while Yuan pondered if Pangu's strength surpassed human gods, so he remarked that Pangu was deeper than imagined. Meanwhile, Toku thought Kurt was still human and destined to yield to Tama's allure. At that moment, Kurt had fully awakened and appeared within the arena. He even heard the crowd and asked what was happening. Chen explained it was a divine contest among nations, with Xia under attack. So he bowed and begged Kurt to aid him against the gods of other nations. However, Kurt casually shrank the rake in his hand and said he hated fighting. He also added he'd rather spend time with Chang than worry about Xia's foes, so he turned and began walking away. Chen called out to him again, even though he appeared completely uninterested, but he froze when Chen asked if he still wished to meet Chang. Chen pressed further by asking if he wanted to see Wukong and the monk. Kurt then pointed, their presence had faded, yet Chen still knew Chang and Wukong's names. Chen then replied he not only knew them but could summon them. But he did not believe him, because his strength seemed far too weak. So Chen said he knew he refused to be a pawn, but summoning Xia deities will restore Kurt's dignity. Doing so would free Chang, Wukong, and Jin, so he asked Kurt if he would fight for Xia now. Hearing these words, Kurt suddenly became furious. He then turned into a hog and questioned Chen if he was mocking him. Chen was struggling in Kurt's grip, but he still managed to persuade him. At that moment, the spirit of Pangu appeared behind him. Kurt immediately recognized Pangu, so he hurriedly released Chen. He then remarked that he did not expect him to summon Pangu, but Chen only asked whether he would help him now. Kurt replied that since Pangu was willing to assist him, then he could trust him as well. With that, he asked who their opponent was. The two of them turned their gaze toward the enemy. Chen explained it was a 9-tailed deity who lured others with her charms. However, Kurt declared that it would be easy for him. On the other side, the Kura people thought Chen's pig deity was charmed by Momo, but Kurt suddenly plunged his rake into the ground and transformed back into his human form, so the Bangzi audience could not help but praise his handsomeness, while the Sindhu people agreed that Xia's monster deity should not be underestimated. Meanwhile, the Eagle Nation wondered if he could resist Tama's charms. Back in the arena, Momo made her move by calling out to Chen. She slowly removed her outer robe while saying that she had a great proposal. After taking off her robe, she boldly invited him to join the Kura Nation. She assured him that they would treat him with the highest respect, and that they would not force him to fight again. She even promised that they would help both him and his deity grow. However, he gave no response and simply stood there. On the other side, Yuan was already furious at her psychological tactics. The city lord even shouted at Chen not to fall for her tricks. Still, Momo tempted him that he could have all the money and power. She also offered herself to him in addition to that. Many men of Xia were captivated and thought they would accept it quickly, but they also wondered how Chen would respond. Not long after, Chen firmly declared that he refused her offer. However, she continued to use her charm. She even offered him any women from Kura if she wasn't enough. In that moment, he was surrounded by the beautiful women of the Kura nation, so he quickly took out the rake to use the heavenly projection. Through this, he successfully gained control of Kurt's 9-toothed rake. Momo saw this and said it was a pity since he could have had a bright future. But he only replied by recalling something his professor once told him. He learned honor lies in a blade and truth in a cannon, so fleeing would only worsen their bullying. So he refused to flee, while saying Shia greets friends and fights enemies. Upon hearing this, the people of Shia shouted their guns were ready for Kura. Echoes then filled the arena, as they proclaimed Chen as their warrior leader. Meanwhile, at the deity temple, a servant was sweeping outside. When he suddenly noticed something glowing nearby, he saw the tome shining, and concluded their nation had become twice as fortunate. Back in the arena, Chen leapt into the air with his rake raised high. Momo then immediately took out her fan, and easily blocked the attack from Chen's rake. However, she sensed the blow's strength, and resolved to not spare him. She then proclaimed she would kill him since she could not recruit him. With that, she quickly used her clone technique, and multiple copies of her appeared throughout the arena. She also thought it didn't matter if Chen beat Matt, since he'd never grasped spellcraft. On the other side, Chen had realized that her power far surpassed Matt's, but before he could think further, he saw her already drawing her sword. Her clones followed and unleashed the Kumyo slash on him. Seeing this, he was immediately overwhelmed, yet he still managed to move in time to dodge the attacks, but the force of the slashes pushed him down to the ground. The Kura people quickly laughed at his misery and praised Momo as a genius for her skill. Momo's clones also mocked him and called him weak. After that, all of them lifted their blades and asked how he'd dodge next. The clones quickly unleashed slashes that struck even the ground, so he was left with nowhere to evade. Hence, he decided to have her take his rake. He forcefully drove the rake down and unleashed a straight blow across the floor. Momo was alarmed by this and tried to block using her sword. However, the attack was so powerful that she was completely engulfed by it. The Kura people became restless after watching this. After a moment, she appeared helpless and asked how Chen saw her true body. Meanwhile, on the other side, Tama tried to tempt Kurt if he bowed to her. The Korea people were captivated by this and even wanted to offer their lives. Seeing this, Yuan began to wonder whether Kurt could truly resist Tama's charm. However, Kurt was busy thinking about Chang and remarked that compared to her, Tama looked obviously hideous. Tama was clearly taken aback when she heard him call her ugly, but before she could say more, he's already charging towards her. The Kura people also fumed over their goddess being mocked by a pig. However, Kurt ignored their fury and pressed his attack as Tama leapt away. After evading, she shouted that never before had she been called ugly. So she began weaving spells and was determined to punish him. Her form expanded with Terra's ninefold skill, and she tried to trample him. She even urged him to feel the wrath of the celestial demon. Nearby, Chen watched the scene unfold after tying up Momo. His fury burned as Tama had invoked a divine treasure that multiplied her might tenfold. But Kurt suddenly began to counterattack by using his earth-shaping ability. His body expanded until it finally matched Tama's size, yet she did not waste any time and launched her spirit strike. So Kurt was forced to brace himself with his rake. He spun it in circles to block the incoming blows. He even managed to strike back at her. Chen then marveled that a double S deity like Kurt could suppress a triple S Tama. He then compared his status with Momo's and realized true strength surpassed awakened levels. After a while, blood stained the corner of Tama's mouth. This only enraged her further, and she began to gather her power. She proceeded to raise her hands, and her power overflowed in the air. Seeing the sky suddenly darken, the people of Shia wondered what was happening, but Tama had already conjured multiple fireballs and shouted for Kurt to die. With a command, she sent the burning foxfire descending toward him. The fireballs struck directly where Kurt stood, leaving him with nowhere to evade. In the next instant, he was engulfed by the attacks. So Yuan and the others clenched their teeth in worry. However, Kurt appeared raising his hand as he called upon the water. With his motion, the flames receded as the entity descended. Two spirit deities appeared above the arena and struck the ground in front of Tama with bolts of lightning. Seeing the explosion, Momo looked toward Tama's side in concern. Yet Tama stood unharmed, and the ground alone lay split beneath her. Even so, she could not help but feel a growing sense of unease. Suddenly, water began to gather in the sky, and Kurt was soon surrounded by it. Seeing this, she quickly demanded to know where the water came from. He calmly replied that it came from the heavenly river. As he spoke, the water continued to flow and swirl around his body. Without wasting any more time, he charged toward her while moving with the wind. The Kura people watched nervously and began praying, while Kurt pressed forward and swung his rake in a powerful chopping strike. In response, Tama attempted to block it using her Terra skill. Their powerful techniques clashed violently. However, Kurt's rake clearly pierced through her shield, and it did not take long for the shield to shatter before her. She staggered back as fragments of her shield shattered across the floor. Shia's people saw this and lauded Kurt for breaking her greatest treasure. In contrast, the Kura nation fell into complete silence. Back in the arena, Kurt continued his assault and swung his rake once more, yet the attack passed straight through her body instead. He was clearly confused by this. However, when her body vanished, her real form appeared nearby. She then began to realize he was stronger and more proficient than her. Because of this, she could not help but glance toward Chen. She wondered when Shia had a divine guardian capable of summoning a monster like Kurt. On the other side, Kurt realized she used a transportation technique that he also knew, so he swiftly invoked water transportation and appeared before her. He took advantage of her lapse, and he lunged with his rake, She was driven toward the ground but managed to regain balance. However, her blood had already begun to fall onto the ground, so she could only acknowledge that he was truly formidable. Because of this, she decided to use the power of her 9 tails, where she summoned 3 more spirit deities to stand beside her. Seeing Shu, Maru, and Terra appear, the Kura people were stunned. The Oni King Shu then immediately roared that it was time for Kurt to die, so he began summoning his sword field. The sun goddess Terra also started gathering all of her power nearby, so Kurt prepared himself to transform into the 36 forms. He took the form of an eagle and evaded the countless falling swords aimed at him. After reverting, he ridiculed Tama for calling reinforcements that are merely spiritual forms. However, Tama countered by asking why he had been running if he was unafraid. In response, he asked who had said that he was running away. He then called upon the ruler to descend, and he grew vast enough to fill the space. He also used his rake to summon the waters of the heavenly river. When he pointed the rake upward, the water began to gather and swirl around it, and as the great marshal Kurt, he proclaimed that all water from heaven to the ocean was under his command. With those words, he caused an ocean to appear above the spirit deities. He sent the torrent crashing down on Shu, who was swiftly overwhelmed. On the other side, Terra managed to evade the rushing waters, but the evasion left her deeply irritated, so she gathered her power and conjured a massive purple fire. Then she directed all the fireballs toward Kurt. Kurt raised his rake to block the incoming attacks, but the simultaneous attack still engulfed him, so the Kura people erupted in joy, since Terra had invoked divine punishment against him. At that moment, Kurt could no longer hold his ground, so he was sent rolling across the arena from the force of the impact. Seeing him collapse, the Shia people became worried of the SSS god's power. Meanwhile, Terra had already surrounded Kurt. As she looked down at his weakened form on the ground, she mocked him by calling him nothing more than a useless pig. However, he suddenly began to move, and called out to his 9-toothed rake. At first, Terra was confused by this, but in the next instant he extended his hand, and seized her by the neck. She was even more stunned as her divine power drained away. Kurt, on the other hand, had transformed, and agreed that she was right that he was a pig, so he used that very form to easily lift her into the air. Then he forcefully slammed her into the ground. Watching him overpower her, the audience praised him for striking only after her guard fell. Some even looked at Chen, and assumed he had summoned Kurt for their shared ruthlessness. Before long, Terra's spirit faded, yet she vowed to never forget the humiliation. Kurt ignored her, and continued walking toward Tama. He struck her without hesitation, and she was soon declared dead. Afterward, Kurt quickly shrank back into his human form, and Chen rushed toward him. However, he began coughing up blood, and ordered him not to come. Even so, Chen called out his name in worry. He even hurried forward when Kurt fell to his knees. The people of Shia also began wondering why he had suddenly collapsed. Kurt then told Chen that he did not want him to see the way he looked now. After all, he might be a hero for them, but he's actually a coward for never chasing Chang. So he made Chen vow to bring his senior and master to his grave to prove his courage. Chen immediately refused, saying that he should tell them himself. He also shouted to Shia people, and urged reverence for the great deity. Upon hearing this, Yuan quickly understood his intention, so he ordered everyone to bring out food offerings. The people at home also began placing food offerings for Marshal Kurt. Soon, Kurt's spirit form was surrounded by countless offerings. At that moment he slowly opened his eyes, and in this way, the double S-class deity Marshal Kurt was reverently honored. After a while, Venus appeared to announce the result of the 4th round. With Shaya Nation's deity nearly unconscious, and Kura's deity dead, she declared that the winner was Chen of the Shia Nation. She also declared it was an exciting moment, since none expected Shia's will to be so strong. Meanwhile, the Shia Nation prayed for Kurt, who had fought on sheer resolve. Just like them, Chen broke down, but Kurt quickly stopped him. He then brightened as Kurt opened his eyes and told him he wasn't dead yet. He also helped him stand up, and Kurt declared that they had won. Meanwhile, a Bangzi student questioned Shia's faltering gods, and the teacher replied, "It's due to their frail faith." Back in the arena, Kurt told Chen that the next step was up to him. After all, it was time for him to leave and search for his white moonlight. Before he could depart, Chen called out to him again, so he told him to speak no further and remember his promise. Hearing this, Chen fell silent for a moment. Then he quickly regained his composure, and urged him to take care of himself. The people of Shia were surprised to hear this, but they soon shouted in unison for Kurt to take care as well, as he slowly vanished into the air. Afterward, Yuan ordered that the deeds of Kurt be recorded in their ancient records. He also warned that Shia's gods must always be remembered, and his subordinate agreed, so the phoenix was then sent to deliver the report. Meanwhile, the city lord still could not recover from what had happened to Kurt, He muttered they were unworthy for forgetting their gods. However, Yuan told him that they still had a future. And that future was Chen, who had become the nation's greatest hope. Meanwhile, on the other side, Fred's deity slowly sheathed his sword, after he successfully killed the spider monster Gumo. At the same time, Fred had already eliminated Mary herself. Mary's eyes then widened after learning the gap between them remained vast. After saying this, her body finally collapsed onto the ground. Fred ignored this, and instead began to hope that he was not too late. Later in the arena, Venus announced the final clash between Xia and Kura. She also added that this battle would determine control of half the nation. With that, she urged both sides to send out their representatives. Chen heard this and understood it was time to rise once more. However, someone tapped his shoulder and stopped him. He looked up and saw that it was the city lord himself. The city lord named Bill assured him his role was over, and he will go next. However, Chen pressed to join, and said he knew the hidden history of Xia's gods, so Bill replied the final round was his duty, and Chen was too weak for Kura's trump card. Besides, he had once been a genius too, since his own deity was Zilong. Suddenly, Fred arrived, and urged Bill to let him go instead. Bill was happy seeing him, and said that he had thought he would not come. Fred then replied he'd never delay for the nation, despite Kura's crafty spies. Setting that aside, he warned them that time was running out, as there were only 30 seconds left in the countdown. So without hesitation, he quickly stepped into the arena. Then he announced his name and asked who dared to face him. One of the Kura Nation's players heard this and fell silent. After stretching for a moment, he suddenly vanished from his seat. In the next instant, he appeared in the arena and introduced himself as Yuta. The Kura audience saw him and quickly declared they would win this round, while the Xia audience began to lose hope because Yuta was known as the Divine Child. Hearing this, Chen said Yuta was unexpected, and Yuan agreed since he's Kura's prodigy. He was even hailed as a rare genius and a double S divine chosen. As he looked at Yuta, he revealed he killed Jun and his sea dragon at 18. 9 years earlier, in the waters of the East Sea, Yuta had stood upon the tendon of the dragon after killing Jun. He even claimed dragon pieces that he thought were ideal for his sister's bow, so he tried his best pulling it from the dragon. Then once he successfully claimed it, the dragon finally died under the thundering skies. Yuan also noted Yuta's god was a supreme one, and their link was 80%. Hearing this, Chen resolved to fight Yuta in a divine duel if Fred lost. Meanwhile, in the arena, Yuta mentioned he had long known of Xia's immortal swordsman, but Fred responded by drawing his sword. Then he lifted it toward him, saying no further words were needed. After all, Yuta had caused a drought after killing the sea dragon god, and, as a result, hunger had spread across the land. He even recalled a child struggling to ask for water, and the mother asking her to wait, while she herself wept helplessly for her to drink. So Fred continued pointing his sword at him. He gritted his teeth and declared must die today. However, Yuta boasted they should honor falling to a chosen of the 3 gods. He also said it was his sister's decree, and the hungry masses would gain honor under Kura. Upon hearing this, the Xia people cursed Yuta and his nation for plunging them into famine. Meanwhile, Chen noticed Yuta's hatred, and confirmed Yuan's claim that weak nations have no diplomacy. So he vowed to crush them, so Xia could reclaim its dignity. Not long after, Venus confirmed the lineup and presented their data. Yuta was listed as a double S guardian, with Suno, who's a triple S deity. In comparison, Fred was an S-class guardian with a double S-class deity Lian. Watching this, the Hawk King ordered war on Xia if they lost to consume the fallen nation. Rodong's leader also prepared to strike Xia to reclaim lost treasures. At the same time, Sindu's leader believed Yuta would win, and told his aide to inform Upal, as they intended to make Xia a sacrificial offering to Lord Shiva. Back in the arena, Yuta began selecting which deity he would summon. Before long, he chose his main god Suno. The Kura people quickly erupted in cheers, and was certain they could destroy Xia. On the other side, Chen heard Yuan remark that this would be a brutal battle. Meanwhile, Fred had already summoned his own main deity Lian. With both sides prepared, Venus finally signaled the beginning of the final battle. Upon hearing the signal, Lian casually took a drink from his gourd. Then, he remarked on how exhilarating the moment felt. He also recited that a pot of wine lay among the flowers, yet no friend to share it, so he wondered where his old companions might be now. Yuta, however, was confused by his words. As he drew power, he said Xia's gods were always like this. The moment he stopped speaking, Fred saw the attack coming from the sky. He tried to move aside, but Yuta's divine sword struck directly where he stood. At the same time, Yuta shouted in anger that they acted as if no one else mattered. So, when the strike ended, Fred was left bleeding with his left arm cut. On the other side, Suno began attacking Lian. The two of them even passed through Fred, who was kneeling on the ground. He tried to halt the bleeding, while thinking that the strike was like bamboo driving through its target. He even looked at the nearby sword, thinking how it fell silent as it approached. Meanwhile, the Shia audience were stunned to see him fall easily from Yuta's one strike. Chen also gritted his teeth in anger as he watched the scene unfold. Suddenly, Fred began chanting about the Dao fruits ripening. He slowly stood, and he proclaimed that sunrise makes the stars disappear. After that, he raised his remaining hand to draw out his energy. Soon he manifested his summon within his palm, and a sword spirit appeared before him. Seeing this, Yuan realized that Fred's Dao fruit had manifested as a sword. However, Chen asked what a Dao fruit was, so he explained every guardian manifest essence, with the Dao fruit as their golden core. So when essence showed, only life or death remained. Hearing this, Chen understood that Fred was betting everything on this fight. Yuta also realized this and called Fred insane, since by calling forth his essence, he boosted his divinity, but doomed his lifespan. Fred replied, his sword Dao was forged through decades of corpses, and was a pity to lose. But he still continued drawing the sword before him, since this sword had once carried him through countless battles at the border, and now he would use it once again against Yuta. Upon knowing this, Yuta asked him if he truly still dared to fight. He quickly replied that his sword Dao guarded the people, a truth Yuta would never know, and Yuta fell completely silent as he listened to this. He then continued raising his hand and calling upon the sword. Soon, the swords carried by the audience began flying toward him. When his Dao sword merged with his physical sword, countless blades rose behind him, and all aimed at Yuta as he challenged him directly. On the other side, Lian drank calmly as Suno said it was his first time seeing a mortal god so arrogant. Lian only replied he would never bow to power or sacrifice his joy and pride. Suno merely sneered and turned his gaze toward Yuta and Fred. At that moment, Fred launched his attack with tremendous speed. Yuta quickly realized that if that sword were to fall upon him, he would certainly die. Moreover, multiple swords were rushing toward him. Forced to retreat, he quickly stepped back, and he hurriedly evaded the descending blades. Seeing this, Suno sighed and said that it was time for him to act. He raised his hand and called upon the domain of heaven. Lian was then instantly trapped inside the domain. However, he only smiled. Then he struck with his eagle slash to break free. With that single strike, he shattered the entire domain. Suno watched this and remarked the situation was getting interesting. He then raised his hand once again and summoned his heavenly cloud sword. As he did so, he looked down at Lian, declaring that divine judgment had arrived. His sword filled with lightning quickly struck him directly, so Lian gritted his teeth in pain as the attack landed. The Shia people were then shaken by his tribulation and found it hard to watch. As Lian continued to be struck by lightning, the leaders of the other nations gathered together to watch the scene unfold. The Sindhu executive said the outcome was decided, so it was time to divide Shia's land. He then showed a map explaining Kura would take half of Shia's land and people. Upon hearing this, Toku smiled knowingly. The executive continued, saying Sindhu's claim was 1/3 of Shia after its fall. However, the Bangzi executive asked why they should get less and not half instead. Hence, he openly declared that such an arrangement was unfair. The Sindhu executive then walked toward him and struck him so hard that he fell to the ground. Then he demanded to know why they should agree. He even asked if Bangzi wished Shiva's glory to reach them as well. Threatened by this, the Bangzi executive quickly replied that he had no objection. Back in the arena, Fred continued attacking Yuta, where he forced him to retreat under the pressure of the blows, and despite having only one arm left, he still stood tall. So Yuta recognized Fred's sharp attacks and formidable will, but seeing Fred's near-perfect state, he needed to unsettle his mind to strike back. Thus, he began mentioning Fred's essence would burn out, making him easy prey. So he invited him to join Kura and be honored as a national treasure. Hearing this, Fred asked if that was really what Yuta meant. Yuta smiled and quickly confirmed it. But before he could say more, Fred charged toward him. The sudden movement caught him off guard and forced him to raise his sword. As a result, he struggled to block the overwhelming attack. At the same time, Fred told him that he could see the fear in his eyes, yet he kept saying the result was already set. Then he glanced upward toward Lian's direction. Lian endured the agony in order to stay awake and rip apart his enemy's face. Suno, however, continued to look down on him with cold disdain. Meanwhile, Toku observed Lian's endurance, yet he knew he wouldn't last much longer. Back in the arena, Yuta shouted that Fred's deity stood no chance against the executioner god Suno. But Fred only asked if gods were truly pure, as they demanded respect and ruled over millions. With those thoughts, he questioned what kind of divine radiance they truly possessed. Since the suffering of Shia's soldiers and people lingered in his memory, yet all people were free, so gods had no right to look down on them. Hearing this, Chen could no longer remain silent. He recited a poem on living fully and never leaving the cup empty. The people heard him and joined in reciting together. Before long, the sound of the poem reached Lian's ears. He then reached for his gourd as the words stirred something deep within him. He felt its spirit and drank from the gourd again. At that moment, Suno noticed that the lightning striking him had begun to weaken. Since Lian had finally regained his clarity of mind, the Kura people were also stunned. He broke free from the tribulation. Knowing that, Suno reached for his blade that lay untouched for ages. Then he pressed forward, vowing to protect humans and show Lian his swordsmanship. His lightning strike quickly crashed toward Lian, who raised his swords as a shield. At once, Suno recalled using his heavenly sword to defeat Auroch, an act from which the Yamato swordsmanship had been born, and with this same sword, he proclaimed that he had slain the evil gods of Hera. Lian immediately felt the force of Suno's strike as he listened. The force even pushed him back to the ground. The Kura people watching the battle believed that Lian had already reached his limit. Suno also jeered that Lian's technique was childish, and wondered why he avoided a swift end. At the same time, Yuta claimed Fred's best strike failed to pierce his guard, so he boasted that his thunder-forged armor would outlast Fred's waning strength. Fred then said that if one sword was not enough, he'd use another. He also vowed that if 10,000 swords failed, 10 million more would follow, since even if the path ahead was difficult, he would continue forward. Without waiting any longer, he rushed toward Yuta again. Across the battlefield, Suno and Lian clashed. As Suno shouted, his technique echoed through Hera, so he had no right to draw a sword. Lian ignored his words to lift his gourd and drank again. Suno then seized that moment and rushed toward him. However, when he arrived at the spot, Lian was no longer there. He was confused and quickly looked upward. There, he saw Lian levitating in the air while gathering his energy. Soon after, he manifested multiple swords and aimed the blades at Suno. He even shared the blade bore a lovely name and called it the Green Lotus Sword. Suno tried to escape the descending swords as he summoned his thunder. With this power, he managed to block the incoming swords. The Shia spectators then doubted if Suno was invincible after withstanding the blows. Yuan also understood things were grave since Lian had revealed his greatest skill, so it seemed to him there was no hope left. But Chen was convinced the sword immortal he recalled had far more power. At that moment, Suno charged forward, declaring Lian's technique could have defeated Kura. Unfortunately for Lian, he was confronting him who carried the hope of the world. He even shouted that he fought for the people while attacking. However, Lian questioned whether he was truly fighting for the people. He remarked that Suno's aura was filled with nothing but slaughter. Hearing this, Suno's brows furrowed as he demanded to know what Lian meant. Lian replied that such words were mere excuses hiding his true nature. Suno became enraged by the accusation and rushed toward him once more. The two of them continued clashing fiercely, and before long, Lian's sword was cut in half. Seeing this, the people of Shia began to wonder if the outcome could truly no longer be changed. Lian also began to bleed as he thought of the difficult path ahead. He collapsed, recalling that he never withered, but he now faced death due to a foreign god. Hearing this, Chen realized that the poems they had recited were still not enough, so he told the others to recite the book's poems to lend strength to the immortal swordsman. But he corrected himself by saying that Lian was an immortal poet. He then instructed them to read the third poem on page 5 and continue to the poem on page 7. With this, he led them to recite the verse of leaving no trace on life's journey. As the words echoed, Lian slowly regained strength, listening to poems new to him. He lifted the blade again as he felt these poems and his journey flow in his blood. Suno witnessed this and could not hide his shock. Before he could recover, Chen cried out that the sword chi reached 30,000 miles. With that declaration, Lian miraculously extended his broken blade and struck Suno. The strike burned Suno's face, and he angrily demanded how it was possible. Nevertheless, Lian had successfully provoked him, so he drew his swords again. The Kura people watching remembered Suno was the god of heavenly thunder, so they questioned his dark aura and his holiness that turned into bloodlust. They then looked toward Lian and wondered what he had done to their god. Meanwhile, Chen said Yuta's contempt for lives already revealed the truth. He emphasized that Suno's true nature was brutality and slaughter. In the past, Yuta told his men to ensure the blood offering's safety. The innocent people asked what they had done wrong, yet they were still drained of their lives by Suno. So Chen said the deity's influence shaped the chosen, and they were deeply linked. Back in the arena, Suno coldly told Lian he was about to die in the most pitiful way. With those words, he called upon the dark night of decay. A thick black smoke began pouring from his sword and quickly rushed toward Lian. Chen's anger then rose as he saw Suno's descent into darkness made him unreadable. Bill, who stood nearby, heard these words and was left speechless. Meanwhile, Lian leapt away in an attempt to evade the dark wisps, yet the mist continued to chase him relentlessly, until he was finally cornered. Soon, he was completely engulfed by the dark smoke. Yuan nearly collapsed, watching this, but Bill quickly held him upright. After some time, Lian finally reappeared after using a barrier to protect himself. However, his face had already been drained of its youth. The crowd saw his sudden aging and trembled at a power over time. Yana also remarked that Sono seemed more dreadful after succumbing to darkness. However, Chen still believed there was hope, since Lian is not only an immortal swordsman, he was also known as the most brilliant poet immortal in history. Meanwhile, Lian had already been weakened by the dark mist. Suno took advantage of this moment and launched another attack, yet Lian still managed to leap away in time to avoid it. So he vowed to break him and see his divinity crushed under Kura's feet. Lian eventually fell to his knees, questioning if nothing could be done. Chen felt he could not allow this to continue, though time had already erased many poems, so he decided that he would bear the burden himself. He then began to recite lines on life's passing and death's return. The others were confused by this, while some thought he was granting Lian divinity. However, he soon began coughing up blood. So Yuan urged him to stop, but he refused because time was running out. Hence, he continued shouting the poem he had begun. The verses echoed throughout the arena, and Lian heard them clearly. He slowly raises his sword while reciting that struggles fade against time. Suddenly, Chen cried that heaven gave him worth and even lost wealth would return. So he finally regained his strength and even took a moment to drink from his gourd. With a light step, he moved forward using the 7 stars steps. He also unsheathed his sword as he advanced. Then he used his drunken technique to strike Suno with a single powerful blow. Suno was then stunned that a foreign god could wield time itself. On the other side of the battlefield, Yuta thought he'd won since Fred's essence was spent, but Fred gave no response, and simply leaned on his sword for support. So he noticed his essence fading to a thread. After realizing this, he turned towards Sono and was certain the end was coming. At that moment, Sono admitted that Lian was his hardest opponent since birth. Yet, he declared that despite the evil surrounding him, he would feel no guilt. After all, that was the road he had walked from the very beginning, and as thunder fell, he declared he was born to light that moment. So, with a murderous smile on his face, he shouted that he loved this world. The Kura people praised him after hearing it, and believed he still protected them. Some even justified that despite the darkness surrounding him, he still loved the world deeply. Toku was also pleased, their nation's power was rising, and brought greater faith to the gods. Back in the arena, Lian continued wielding his broken sword. He clashed with Suno, who relentlessly pressed his attacks. While he struggled, he also saw Suno's tyranny conceal a deeper horror with power rising. But his thoughts broke when he saw something unusual ahead. He saw thunder gather on Suno's sword, with souls wailing inside. Seeing this, Chen clenched his jaw, knowing he couldn't grant divinity again after exhausting himself. So all he could do was think of Lian as an immortal poet, whose true power was greater still. Yet he wondered whether he could still afford the price required to awaken that power. Back in the arena, Lian began running to avoid the descending thunder. However, the lightning pursued him with terrifying speed. In the end, he had no choice but to face it directly. The Shia audience fell to their knees watching this, and believed defeat was near. Meanwhile, Chen knew victory needs a price, yet he struggled to find the poem to awaken Lian. In that moment, Lian was already lying on the ground. He gritted his teeth and wondered whether it was still not enough. He then reached for his gourd, asking his old friend to join his last journey. At the same time, Chen began searching through the poems of Lian that he remembered. After a moment, he recalled the Song of the River. He remembered this poem was lesser known and was written when Lian faced hardship. He then looked at the weakening Lian, hoping the verses would awaken his divinity. Without hesitation, he recited lines of his poems defying the sea. Lian heard this and began to fall in deep thought. He was even more stunned to hear a voice vowing to write a poem surpassing all poets. Looking toward the source, he saw a familiar figure behind him. He saw himself raising his brush, while others read his poem, and remarked he was unknown yet clearly gifted. He then continued to listen to words of fearing youth, and his poems that moved gods. Soon after, he heard Chen repeating that life must be lived to the fullest. In that instant, memories of his adventurous life when he was still alive flashed before him. Chen, on the other hand, waited anxiously for his response. Not long after Lian lifted the shattered blade, which in his eyes had become a brush, it ignited again, and he said he now understood who he was. He murmured that the sword was his youthful spirit as an immortal poet. With that realization, he struck Suno even at a great distance. The sudden strike caught Suno completely off guard, and he soon lay motionless on the ground. After this, Lian told him he no longer needed the burden and could rest. As those words fell, Sono's body slowly dissipated into the air. After Sono vanished, he saw himself reciting about the ape's cries echoing across the river. When the poem concluded, he saw himself in a boat that already gone beyond Thousand Mountain. On the other side of the arena, Yuta was shocked to see Suno's spirit vanish, yet he still insisted that it did not matter even if his god had been defeated. With that belief, he rushed toward Fred and shouted that he was still standing. However, Fred did not even raise his head to look at him. Instead, he calmly thrust his sword forward. The strike landed instantly and caused Yuta to lose consciousness. Seeing this, the Kura people fell into panic that they lost. In contrast, the Shia audience erupted in joy for their dramatic comeback. Many of them began praising Chen and giving him full credit for the victory, but they were interrupted when Hans pointed toward Fred in the arena. They saw Fred sitting calmly on the ground with Lian standing behind him. A green mist surrounded him. Then Lian's form gradually became clearer behind him. Soon after, his profile showed he advanced to double S rank, while Lian reached triple S. After noticing this, he whispered of rebirth and strength born from being broken. Yuan also rejoiced, seeing Fred forge a new Dao essence and rise in rank with his deity. However, Bill asked what this new Dao essence was, so he explained that it was a Dao unparalleled in both poetry and swordsmanship. Hearing this, Bill could not help but glance toward Chen nearby. Then he admitted that he had never expected him to bring so many surprises. Back in the arena, Lian spoke of gallants from Wuling riding through the spring wind. As the words echoed, a soft yellow light began to surround Fred. Soon after, his severed arm slowly regenerated. Seeing this, he was visibly surprised, yet he soon looked toward the stands with a smile. With sincere gratitude, he thanked Chen, who was watching from nearby. Chen then responded by smiling back at him. Afterward, Venus returned to announce Xia's victory over Kura in round 1 of the preliminaries. She also congratulated them for ultimately achieving victory. Then she called Chen to the stage to receive the spoils of war. Chen was surprised by this and hesitated for a moment. However, the others urged him to go, since none were more fit to represent their nation. On stage, he was offered to seize half of Kura's people and treasures, or half its land and treasures. He began to consider how Shia had talented people and territory secured long-term gains, so he chose the second option to seize half of Kura's land and treasures. Venus quickly acknowledged his choice after hearing it. After that, he looked up toward the sky and noticed something moving. As he looked more closely, he realized that it was a massive red dragon. The dragon circled around the destiny map. As it descended, a single motion ripped vast land from Kura. The people of Osaka realized half their country was gone and fell into chaos. Toku himself became hysterical when he saw what had happened. The shock was so great that he eventually fainted. His servants saw this and hurriedly called for help. Meanwhile, Venus announced Xia's rank jumped from 39 to 9. After saying this, she announced the first round of preliminaries had ended. Not long after, Rome sought a mythological battle with Kura. The Sindhu nation did the same, followed by Greece and even America. But Bill was puzzled why 4 former allies now challenged Kura. Chen then explained that once allies are no longer useful, they are to be discarded. Afterward, Chen discovered that his bond with Pangu had reached 10%. He also realized summoning gods raised compatibility, but destiny mattered more now, since as soon as Xia took half of Kura, his compatibility with Pangu grew stronger. Because of this, he could not help but look at Pangu's figure and think that summoning him in the arena might no longer be an impossible dream. As for the divine traits, he believed it can be gained by calling gods and bestowing divinity, since his status window clearly listed the deities whose divinity he had enhanced. While thinking about this, the image of Zhang flashed through his mind, along with the memory of how Zhang still thought of them before vanishing, so he silently resolved that he would make sure to bring him back. He then continued checking his status, and found 10% compatibility triggered a life-bound technique. He immediately invoked Pangu, whose body was immortal and whose soul was indestructible. Soon his body glowed, and the damage from granting divinity was fully healed. It then became clear he could revive countless lost gods without suffering soul damage. Meanwhile, in the depths of infernal purgatory, countless people were imprisoned and screaming in agony. Some of them gradually faded away as a red mist drifted past. The ruler of the purgatory, Yanmo, was also present, but she too was bound in heavy shackles, while another woman stood before her. This woman was none other than Terra. She appeared stunned to learn Chen had single-handedly ended Xia's disadvantage, so she asked if Chen had completely wiped out her brother's soul too. In response, the servant confirmed that the report was true. She then smiled and remarked that the situation had become quite interesting. The servant continued, saying Kura's allies had declared war, Toku was ill, and all awaited her judgment. After hearing this, she could not help but call them a group of opportunistic scoundrels. She then lifted her hand and told them to surrender the next round and let her handle it. After that, she pointed the black mist at Yanmo, and remarked that her kin is now unrest. Or perhaps it was her other self. She slowly reached out to her and asked whether Yanmo had ever coveted her place. Her soft laughter followed, and she insisted everything was nothing but fate. On the other side, the servant watched in confusion, for she was meant to blaze like the sun. Yet, as he continued observing her back, he noticed that she was now surrounded by both lightning and dark mist. So he wondered why she now seemed so ominous and terrifying. Later in the arena, Venus announced Kura had forfeited, and the price was ceding Kyoto. She further added that Kura had forfeited twice, with only one chance left. Setting that aside, she announced that the ceded city went to the prior victor, so the people within Kyoto began fleeing in panic at that moment. The Shia audience saw it as gain, yet they also worried about their compatriots scattered abroad. Yuan reminded them that this was the harsh price of defeat, since citizens with slave marks lost divinity, became expendable and die in foreign lands. Hearing this, Chen asked whether Shia had ever forfeited in the past. Yuan revealed Shia forfeited thrice, lost 3 cities, and could no longer yield. After learning this, Chen pondered the fate of their compatriots, far from home. Meanwhile, a Sindhu leader thought Kura chose to yield to Shia, but the young man beside him said it's due to heavy losses. Hearing this, the leader began asking him who their next opponent should be. The young man remarked Rome and Greece are unbeatable, and small nations could not raise destiny. So after weighing these factors, he concluded that there was only one choice left. He declared that their next opponent would be the Shia kingdom. However, he was reminded that Shia had defeated the Kura nation, and that a great genius like Chen had emerged. Because of this, Shia's ranking had risen dramatically to 9th place in the world. The young man responded that Shia's gods were no weaker than any nation. The bearded man was taken aback, for the secret was unheard of. Still, he asked why they would choose such a difficult opponent at this time. The young man explained that Shia's divine power was great, but shattered in a war long ago. Thus, Shia's gods seemed weak, not only from civil strife, but from lost divinity. He also said Shia's gods had general strength, but king deities reigned supreme. The bearded man felt certain of victory, for their king-level gods outnumbered Shia's. The young man calmly replied that what they needed now was simply to defeat Shia. He smiled faintly as he spoke of devouring them and taking their land. Moreover, he also intended to turn Shia's gods into Buddhist slaves. The bearded man then recalled the Holy Sun's purity, yet he saw only aggression. Back on the stage, Venus announced that Sindhu needed to pick a new foe, so she then began to reveal which nation would face them. The people of Shia quickly prayed not to be chosen because Sindhu is powerful too. Unfortunately for them, Venus soon called the name of their country. The people of Shia felt ill fate after being marked once more by a powerful foe. Soon after, Venus officially brought the preliminary round to a close. Then she also reminded them the next round was Monday. With the announcement finished, the crowd gradually began leaving the arena. However, Chen remained behind and deep in thought. Later at the War Preparation Center, the leaders of Shia gathered together. However, Chen's thoughts stayed with those driven from their homes. Because of this, he asked Fred which 3 cities Shia had previously ceded. Fred was clearly surprised by the question, but he still answered. He said the territories given up were Yizhou, Guangdao, and Macau, with Yizhou most fertile. However, it had been more than 50 years since Yizhou was lost through 5 divine battles. Hearing this, Chen asked whether Shia had ever attempted to reclaim the lost territory. Fred explained Shia used all power to resist foes, leaving no force to recover ceded territory. Chen was surprised to hear this explanation, yet he resolved that loss must not be accepted, and swore to recover the territories. So he asked Fred for the list of Shia's commanding gods. Fred quickly asked if he would use commanding gods to reclaim the lands. He also warned the task was near impossible, since none had ever succeeded. Despite the warning, Chen said he could not watch Shia's people suffer foreign enslavement, so Fred finally agreed and chose to place his trust in him. Soon afterward, he began reviewing the gods Shia possessed. He saw most were human gods of the past, brave in battle, yet King Ju ranked only B. Suddenly, Fred noted human gods are frail, and demon gods are powerful, so they are scarce. Even so, Chen decided to choose 3 human gods from the list. Fred then commented that Bai and Neja are prominent but Ju lacked power. Later after that, Chen met with Ju's divine guardian to grant Ju new divinity. Ju's guardian then rejoiced when he found their bond is now 90%. Yuan was also astonished as Ju surged in moments from B rank to SS, but he began to worry that the price Chen would have to pay might be too heavy, so he quickly urged him not to push further. At that moment, Chen's mind was suddenly flooded with dark mist. He gritted his teeth as a dark aura enveloped his body. However, he quickly calmed himself and activated the 9 cycles skill, With its assistance, the dark aura gradually dispersed, and the strength within his body stabilized once again. A faint smile crossed his face since 9 cycles had nullified the soul damage. The discovery also thrilled him because the divinity of Shia's gods might return soon. Thus, he reassured Yuan that Pangyu was his god and that he nullified soul harm. Yuan was clearly shocked upon hearing this revelation. Meanwhile, Guardian Yang advanced to double S rank with his main god Ju, so both he and Ju thanked Chen for granting new divinity, and Chen welcomed them. Chen then thought of Ju, who never crossed the Dawn River but stood as a great hero. Though his glory had never truly been witnessed or felt by later generations, he believed that from this moment Ju would be seen by the world again. Just then, a girl approached him and called him her idol, so he greeted her back. At the same time, the girl's main god Neja was observing him with deep curiosity. Neja then remarked that he sensed the aura of his ancestor in him. Hearing this, Shen reflected that Pangyu created the 3 purities and Taiyi was taught by its head. Being Taiyi's disciple, Neja was counted as a grand disciple of Pangyu. In that moment, Neja finally perceives the presence of Pangyu. Chen then watched Neja kneel and thought of his childlike purity without a father's love. So he raised his hand at Neja, who was moved by the ancestor watching over him. With that gesture, he began granting him new divinity. Neja, who was still kneeling, suddenly sensed a change. He quickly stood up as his body began to transform. At the same time, his guardian discovered that their compatibility had risen from 30% to 80%. Pangyu also appeared and raised his hand toward Neja. With a swift motion, Neja manifested 3 heads and 6 arms. Seeing this transformation, Neja immediately bowed toward Pangyu in gratitude. After that, he casually exchanged a fist bump with his guardian Lily, who was now an S-rank guardian. Lily also tells Chen truly deserved to be her idol because Neja's power surprised her. Nearby, Yana watched everything unfold with visible excitement. Chen glanced toward her and recalled he already granted divinity to Bai, who excelled in strategy. After that, he told them they might soon face hard tasks to reclaim territories. With that in mind, they gathered around a map. Chen then noted that divine battles kept capitals fortified, but colonial territories vulnerable, so he directed Fred to arrange 30,000 men under Neja, Ju and Bai to reclaim the lands. However, Bill warned 10,000 troops could not break the cities even with Chen's ability. But Fred reminded him that without Chen, Shia's losses would have been immeasurable. Because of that, they should place greater trust in him and his ability. Chen then said he also wanted the media to broadcast the attack live to boost morale. And with Tian in charge of the media, he asked Yuan to handle it, yet Yuan hesitated. He worried the broadcast could shame them and lower morale. However, Chen reassured him that they would win this battle. The next day, Chen finally issued to notify Neja to prepare for a divine battle, while he and Yuan watched the live broadcast from the command room. Meanwhile, in Yizhou, now a Sindhu colony, Neja waited with his army. Not far away, another force was already waiting for them. Leading the army was Brahma, who rebuked Neja for trespassing on Sindhu's domain. Seeing this scene, Yuan could not help but wonder how Brahma had appeared there. Chen also noted Brahma remained influential and rarely appeared in distant colonies. As he thought about this, his gaze remained fixed on Neja. He then concluded he might still struggle against Brahma, even at full power. Back on the battlefield, Neja questioned Brahma's claim that the land belonged to Sindhu. He emphasized Yizhou belonged to Shia since ancient times, so Brahma had no claim. He then raised his spear, declaring he came reclaim Shia's land. Hearing this, Yuan could not help but question Neja's confidence, since at full strength he was but an ant before Brahma. Chen also felt uneasy and thought Neja's attitude showed something was off. Meanwhile, Brahma raised his hand, saying he had not expected Neja to be Buddha's son. He also claimed Shia's Buddhism linked to Sindhu, and asked him to join by heaven's will. However, Neja declared that his fate belonged to himself and not to heaven. Without hesitation, he bound Brahma with his red silk cloth. Then he charged forward, shouting that even Buddhism had no right to determine his destiny. Watching this unfold, Chen remarked Neja was bold, yet his strikes were swift as thunder. However, when Neja struck Brahma, a barrier appeared, blocking his spear. Yuan saw this and doubted any double S rank could pierce it. But Fred suddenly arrived and said that there was still a chance. Then he happily informed them that Brahma's aura was unstable. At that very moment, Neja's spear managed to pierce the barrier, yet Brahma kept urging him to join Buddhism because he was Buddha's son. In response, Neja angrily told him to stop speaking nonsense. With another powerful strike, he completely shattered Brahma's barrier. Chen quickly confirmed his suspicion, while Yuan stayed in disbelief. Fred then reminded them that what they were seeing could not be Brahma's true form. On the battlefield, Brahma was enraged that Neja's spear had reached him. His incarnation form was then revealed, and he angrily rebuked Neja for challenging him. But Neja retorted that Buddha was false, and the incarnation before him was just for show. After saying this, he charged forward, declaring it was time to say goodbye. Brahma felt threatened and hurriedly raised his hand to block the attack. However, Neja's spear struck instantly, and the incarnation dissolved into air. Yuan was finally relieved it was only Brahma's incarnation. Chen then remarked Brahma was weakened due to Vishnu and Shiva, to which Fred agreed. Meanwhile, in Gangdao, Jua ordered the sea gates opened and all their ferries burned. In this way, they can finally save the exiles and reclaim their homeland. The men behind him realized he was the famous King Ju and resolved to serve him. Soon, the force shouted that with backs to the river, they would reclaim their land. Back at headquarters, Yuan asked if the streaming gear was ready, and the technician said yes, so he immediately ordered the feed to be connected to Xia's largest streaming platform. Meanwhile, at Gangdao Plaza, a pianist announced he would teach a famous Hawk Nation song. However, a young girl insisted that Xia had its own songs, yet the man scoffed that Xia could not possibly have their own songs. Back at the port, Ju reminded them to focus on Hawk Nation, and had the live stream confirmed. Chen, on the other hand, watched with excitement as the show was about to begin. Meanwhile, at the plaza, the pianist kept teaching Xia citizens the Hawk song. At the same time, Ju had already entered the streets of Gangdao. At the headquarters, the technician told Yuan the Gangdao signal was connected. Back at the plaza, the crowd had fallen silent after hearing the pianist's earlier remarks. Then one man boldly declared the first song they learned was My Motherland. Meanwhile, on the street, a woman looked at jewelry when a Sindhu citizen noticed her. He immediately ordered his men to take her away. When she was grabbed, she asked in alarm what they intended to do. The Sindhu man then said she should feel lucky to be his concubine. Back at the plaza, the pianist urged the man to sing the song he had mentioned. The chubby man looked surprised at first, but he soon began singing a verse about the great river. A woman beside him also joined in singing, while the pianist stood there silently as he listened. Before long, more people began to join the song and fill the plaza with the melody, so the pianist could not hide the disdain growing on his face. On the other side, the Sindhu man's hand was slapped aside before he could grab the woman. Ju appeared and sternly told him to take his filthy hands away from her. The Sindhu man was immediately enraged by this, and he demanded to know whether Ju had any idea who he was. But before he could continue, Ju's spear struck him. His body collapsed to the ground and he fell unconscious. One of the guards quickly rushed over to check on him. The guard then calmly removed his sunglasses. He also summoned his deity and asked if Ju meant to oppose Sindhu. As he finished speaking, the guards summoned their deities and surrounded Ju. Yet Ju stood firm, declaring any who opposed him would be slain. The guards were quickly startled by his words and by what they saw next. Some even fled at once when Ju's forces appeared in the distance. Back at the plaza, the Xia citizens continued joyfully singing the song of My Motherland. Yuan watched this and told the others to head to the arena. As the divine battle neared, Fred then replied friends were welcome, while Chen added jackals would meet rifles. Meanwhile, in Sindhu's seating, the leaders discussed the order of their god's appearance. However, the Holy Sun reminded them to first decide the battle mode. Before they continued, a secretary rushed in, reporting Xia had attacked Gangdao. He also informed the bearded leader that his son Vic had died during the attack. The leader was immediately stunned by the news. The others also grew enraged by the ambush and declared Xia must pay. However, the secretary added another alarming news that Kashi was attacked. The leader grew even furious since Kashi was sacred, and he saw Xia aiming for war. He then reminded the Holy Sun of their priority in choosing in this battle, and he replied the mode was set. Thus, he declared that the battle would be a god-demon free for all. The group reacted with surprise, since it was a rare mood and it tested numbers of gods. The Holy Sun rose, as they noted triumph meant killing the last deity in this mode. The Holy Sun then said Xia was weak even with Chen, and could not beat Sindhu. Meanwhile, Yuan told Chen that Neja, Ju, and Bai had already marched to Kashi City. But Chen replied that Sindhu's colonization of Gangdao had only begun to be settled. Later on the stage, the goddess of the underworld Eris announced she would host because Venus could not. However, a drunkard shouted at her for supplanting his beloved Venus. Eris heard this and looked at him. She then walked toward the man and asked him to judge who was more attractive. The drunkard replied that she was not bad either. However, in the next moment, she grabbed him by the neck. With nothing but her bare hands, she swiftly snapped it. The sound echoed and the man collapsed to the ground. Seeing this, another man protested loudly that the temple must punish Eris for killing. Eris merely ordered him to remain silent. Before he could say another word, she released a flock of vultures toward him. The birds attacked instantly. Within moments, the man's flesh was stripped away, leaving nothing but a skeleton behind. Eris watched the scene with clear satisfaction. Afterward, she resumed her speech, declaring the fight a group battle of gods and demons, where the rules limited 3 chosen per side, fighting until one side's gods were slain. Upon hearing this, Shia's audience believed Sindhu feared Chen and used this to defeat them. But they knew Sindhu's unbroken myth made their gods stronger, and Yuan feared Xia would lose. Meanwhile, the man from Sindhu asked Eris to make Xia cede if they refused group rules. Yet, Eris coldly asked him whether he had finished speaking. She added she would not draft special rules since she was not like Venus. Just then, a small puppy suddenly appeared on the ground. The moment she noticed it, her expression softened instantly. She asked if the puppy was his, and he confirmed it was. But inwardly he thought the Holy Sun's prediction was right. Meanwhile, the Holy Sun was praised for predicting this. At that moment, Eris asked if she could pet the puppy, and the man quickly agreed. He even offered her the puppy, and she asked if she really could. So, the man eagerly assured her she could keep it, saying it was their gift. She was pleased by this and accepted the gift. Afterward, she announced that if Xia refused, 5 of its cities would be ceded. With that being said, she asked whether Xia accepted these terms. The Xia audience erupted in anger and accused Sindhu of bribery to seize more land. But they also realized fighting would be hard, and refusal meant losing 5 cities. So Fred urged Chen to cede the land since they had no chance to win. Yuan also urged him to retreat, so they could strike back stronger later. However, Chen calmly asked if he truly had the right to decide. Fred replied that he was Xia's hero, and all would support his choice. After hearing this, he made his decision to fight, so he raised his voice and announced that Xia accepted the god-demon battle. For a brief moment, both Eris and the Sindhu representative fell silent. Meanwhile, the people from Bangzi accused him of risking the nation for his ego. The Kura audience also laughed, and was certain his arrogance would cost him. Even the Greeks said Xia was like a caged bird blind to the vast sky. Meanwhile, the Sindhu leader vowed to use Chen's skull as a cup to honor his son. Suddenly, Chen asked Eris if they could choose the reward for victory. Eris looked at him with a firm expression, and confirmed that they could. So he proclaimed the reward should be half the land and national destiny. Hearing this, the Greeks mocked him since population secured gods and destiny better. So they judged land the least valuable reward Chen could select. However, Chen cared nothing for Sindhu's heritage, since Xia possessed a richer foundation. After all the terms had been settled, Eris called Xia and Sindhu's representatives to come, and with anticipation, she called on the crowd to witness the exciting battle. Meanwhile, Yuan warned Chen he was too impulsive, even with power to awaken gods. Chen listened quietly without interrupting him, so he continued saying that their nation had fewer powerful gods than Sindhu. Despite this, Chen insisted the battle mode was set, and they must find a way to win. He added that their temple housed a large number of gods, but most of them remained unknown due to the lack of divinity, so he believed new divinity would let them surpass their rank. Later on the stage, Eris ordered the representatives to proceed to the preparation area. Suddenly, the Sindhu chief Raj asked Chen who was responsible for the raids of their cities. Chen quickly retorted that Raj was shameless since the cities belonged to them. He then openly declared that he was the one who had planned the operation. After hearing this, Raj swore Chen would soon learn the cruelty of divine battle. After some time, Eris announced that the first match would be Greece versus Kura. She then declared that the second match would be Xia versus Sindhu. With that, she told them to rest in the preparation area. She also stressed that each match would be fought as a god-demon group battle. Upon hearing this, the Holy Sun was surprised Greece chose a group battle, and Kura agreed. The executive then said Greece would be their strongest foe after devouring Kura. However, he claimed that they would fear nothing once they devoured Xia. Soon, the first battle began with Helio of Greece, the first to touch the stone, where he immediately summoned the god Apollo. Seeing this, Yana pointed out Greece had brought forth the sun god. Yuan then explained Apollo was one of the 12 Olympians and child of Zeus and Leto. His power was also below God King, but Greece honored him by summoning him. Back in the arena, Helios summoned Apollo, Neptune, the sea god, and Vulcan, the god of fire. Yuan then noted the lineup was almost the strongest, and Greece aimed to win as Kura lacked rivals. Meanwhile, Kura's representative touched the crystal to summon his chosen. Not long after, the deity that appeared was Terra herself. Upon seeing her, Helios saw her divinity was far greater than before. Yuan also felt her aura change even though she and Apollo shared sun attributes. Aside from him, Bill noted Terra had usually been slightly weaker than Apollo, yet now, as they face each other, the gap between them seems to grow. The Holy Sun also saw Terra gain power, yet Kura still lacked gods to face Neptune and Vulcan. Because of this, he waited to see which gods Kura would summon against Greece. Back on the stage, Eris told Kura's representative to keep choosing gods, but the man calmly replied that he had already finished choosing. Eris was obviously stunned by his response. Chen was also surprised, as were the members of Sindhu, who began calling him a bold maniac. Yuan even thought Terra was courting death by standing against 3 gods. Meanwhile, Hawk Nation thought Kura had given up fighting even. Back on the stage, Eris remained silent for a moment. Then she asked him again if he truly meant to stop choosing gods. The man firmly confirmed his decision. He stood calmly with Terra, whose expression had turned dark. At the same time in Macau, Bai had already arrived some time earlier. After eliminating the remaining enemies, he reported on the condition of the last colony. Fred and the others then watched as he declared Macau had been reclaimed. Upon hearing this news, everyone on their side was filled with joy. Later in the resting area, Chen was all focused calling upon Pangu. As he began resonating with him, a jade dragon circled around them. He continued executing the 9 cycles art, and soon his entire body was burning with a powerful aura. As this happened, Pangu's figure slowly solidified behind him. Yuan observed Chen's aura climb, while Yana confirmed his C rank. However, it did not stop there, and his rank soon rose to B rank. Then it advanced to A rank, and in the next moment, it rapidly broke through into triple S rank. Witnessing this incredible transformation, Yana could not hide her shock. Chen now brimmed with immense strength, as Pangu loomed behind. Yuan was also left stunned by the unbelievable speed of his promotion. Meanwhile, in Kura's area, Toku raged at Shia's new powerhouse. The Holy Sun, however, felt Chen's aura was strange yet familiar. On the other side, the Americans were shocked to see another triple S rank so soon after Fred's rise. Meanwhile, at Shia's temple, the spirit of Pangu had appeared before the other gods. The attendant who witnessed this could not help but call it a miracle. After all, it was Pangu himself who had manifested. Meanwhile, Chen recognized Triple S as mortal's end, but believed he neared the divine realm. Because of this, he could not help but look up at Pangu behind him. He reflected that Pangu's awakening was tied to the nation's destiny, so he opened his status panel to confirm this. Just as he had expected, he discovered his bond with Pangu had grown to 18%. Back in the arena, Apollo was shaken by the rotten darkness before him. The source of that presence was Yanmo, who had emerged from Terra's body. Yanmo then calmly declared that his opponent would be her. Apollo was stunned when he saw her rushing forward, so he could only raise his arms to block the incoming attack. On the battlefield's far side, Terra raised her sword and challenged the 2 gods. Hearing this, Neptune and Vulcan looked at her with clear disdain. Neptune moves first by lifting his trident and unleashing towering waves. Yuan watches this and observes Neptune's prowess that surpasses higher gods. Meanwhile, Toku questioned his aide on whether Neptune or Bozu held stronger divinity. The aide noted both had merits, though Bozu's divinity was weaker than Neptune's. At that moment, a massive wave of water surged toward Terra. She then responded by quickly raising her sword and struck forward. With a single blow, she pierced through the towering wave and split it apart. Neptune then raged at her for burning the Abyssal Sea. However, she merely smiled at the mention of the Abyssal Sea. Then she questioned how an Abyssal Sea could hinder a king-level god. Neptune then replied by recalling her past as a weak false god a century ago. So he wondered how she rose so quickly, and urged her to share the secret. But she only answered that only the weak use decline as an excuse. Without wasting another moment, she rushed toward him with her sword. Vulcan immediately noticed it and hurriedly warned Neptune. However, Terra's sword flashed, and with one strike she beheaded Neptune. On the other side, Yanmo continued his assault on the fallen Apollo. He was overwhelmed, and began to question what she truly was. She replied that none knew light better than her Yanmo, who's born of darkness. After saying this, she rushed forward and ordered him to remember her name. Soon after, he began coughing blood, as her relentless attacks continued to strike him. Amid the assault, his fading sight turned to Neptune, who's already gone. Not long after, his eyes finally closed as well. Since even against only Terra's incarnation, he was overwhelmed and torn apart. Toku rejoiced seeing that Terra's incarnation had so easily torn Apollo apart. However, Yuan pondered how Terra outshone Apollo's long-known power. On the other side, the Holy Sun muttered that the mind should arise free of attachment. Back in the arena, Terra turned to Vulcan and asked if he would yield. Vulcan angrily refused and declared that he was not as spineless as Neptune. He instantly enchanted himself, and flames engulfed his body. His towering figure now stood before Terra like a burning giant. Even spectators in America felt the flames' heat. Terra, on the other hand, realized Vulcan would reject her goodwill, so she quickly made her move and suddenly vanished into thin air. Vulcan was caught completely off guard by this. In the next moment, she appeared behind him without his awareness. She then called upon the abyss to descend. As she spoke, a terrifying abyss surged forward and rushed toward him. Vulcan was shocked and demanded how she held Hell's power. Terra did not answer, but instead, Yanmo appeared behind her. Yanmo then declared that she and her sister had completely merged into one. Hearing this, Vulcan could hardly believe gods of different elements could fuse. However, before he could say more, Terra's sudden blow hurled him to the ground. After that, Yanmo then casually remarked that he had been too noisy. Meanwhile, the Greek spectators stared in shock at Kura's sudden power. At the same time, Helio also collapsed to the ground just as Vulcan had. His father saw this and could not help but call out to him in worry. Yuan then said Greece's power could easily defeat Kura, yet they dispatched weaker gods for practice. Hearing this, Yana agreed that Greece had been arrogant. After a while, Eris officially announced Kura Nation as the winner of the battle. Then she declared that the next match between Xia and Sindhu would begin shortly. Chen stepped onto the stage early. As he walked by, Terra told him to survive and wait to face her. Hearing this, he only looked silently at her retreating figure. Soon afterward, he pressed his palm to the summoning crystal. The images of multiple gods appeared instantly before him. Yuan and Yana, who were watching immediately, became serious. Chen examined the choices and quickly dismissed Chang, whose deity that had to control. He then thought of Fenyu, who repels evil yet has little value against Sindhu's deities. So his choice fell on the remaining three, where the first one is the white dragon horse, Alo. The second was Hyun, whose hooves tread upon primordial chaos, while his final choice was the executioner Earl, along with his dog Howl. However, the Xia audience recalled the deadly dog god and doubted Chen's choice. Some thought only Alo seemed strong, yet too young for Sindhu's gods. They then saw Alo bow to Chen, but Hyun just grumbled he was hungry, so the crowd questioned the presence of a snot-nosed boy there. At that moment, Earl asked if Chen had awakened them, and Chen calmly confirmed. However, Earl told him there was no need for courtesy since they shared lineage. He then looked past him and remarked that his grandmaster had never truly left. Chen followed his gaze and realized that Earl was looking at Pangu. This surprised him, because he had not expected Pangu to be Earl's grandmaster, but he recalled that Earl's master was the Jade Emperor, whose master was Pangu. Suddenly, Earl said his power couldn't awaken Pangu, but he must learn secrets. So he slowly opened his third eye and directed it toward Chen. The moment the light from the eye struck him, Chen immediately saw a strange vision. His sight seemed to leave the earth and drift into space. He saw figures on the ground and realized Earl had projected a memory. He then floats downward, where around him are countless fallen figures, so he suspected this was where the gods had fallen. While he was still processing this thought, he suddenly noticed three familiar figures nearby. One of them was Zeus, who's speaking about Xia's gods still pursuing them. Beside him stood Odin, mocking the Xia gods as foolish with their power gone, yet they still insisted on chasing after them. But before he finished, Jehovah cut in saying God loved mankind. Zeus called it foolish talk, and sarcastically urged him to go with Xia's gods, but he replied that he still had to protect his own people, so Zeus merely scoffed and said that he simply did not dare. Setting that aside, he admitted that he could not help but envy the courage of the Xia gods. Nearby, the Xia gods gathered as the great axe declared Pangu was awakening, but another god replied that awakening Pangu was still nearly impossible. So he released his power, saying Pangu needn't awaken for them to strike invaders. With that being said, he raised his hands and allowed his power to flow outward. Nearby, the goddess gazed at the planet, whispering she could not leave the humans. After all, once she departed, she did not know whether she would ever be able to return. Suddenly, another figure arrived and asked whether they were all tired. The panda-riding god replied that he vowed not to rest until the foreign gods were slain. Thus, the group gathered speaking of feasting and drinking once home. Chen, who was quietly observing nearby, could not help but feel shocked. He realized the figures were the humanity creator Nuwa, the war god Chio, the Jade Emperor, the human emperor Fuxi, and the heavenly axe. After witnessing this final scene, his consciousness suddenly returned to his body, and standing before him was Earl, who had fallen silent. He then asked whether the place he saw was truly where the gods had perished. Earl confirmed that it was and added that all of them were already dead, but Chen refused to believe it and asked if he meant Nuwa and the rest were gone. Earl confirmed it again, and even Alo fell silent. Upon learning this, Chen asked whether this meant that Earth had lost the war, but Earl revealed through his third eye that Earth prevailed and secured a 10 millennia treaty. As those words were spoken, Chen was once again drawn into another vision. This time, he found himself back on the battlefield in space, but what he saw were broken machines, wandering spirits, and ruined ships across the ground. The lifeless forms of Nuwa and the gods also lay scattered not far away. Suddenly, a hand broke through the earth, and a voice said all was now covered in dust. Then Pangu appeared with a giant axe to end the world's injustice. Chen watched as Pangu raised the axe and struck the machine nearby. When the blow finally ended, everything fell into complete silence. In the next moment, he found himself returning to his body. He then looked at Earl and the others. As he realized this was why Shia's civilization declined, he proceeded to cup his hands and thank the ancestors for protecting Shia, and that those gods became pioneers so later generations could live in peace. However, Earl told him they were just survivors and fortunate to be here. He also said the gods faded due to the long struggle between Buddhism and Taoism. As he spoke, he could not help but look toward the empty space before them. But he quickly came to his senses, knowing it was pointless to dwell on ancient matters. So he then asked Chen why he had awakened them. After a brief silence, Chen revealed the arena of myth decided nation's fate, and Shia was set to fight Sindhu. Thus, he summoned them to defeat Sindhu and strengthen Shia's destiny. Upon hearing this, Earl quickly volunteered to fight the bald monks of Sindhu. However, he halted after noticing incense power had changed format. He saw the holy sun reaching out to touch the summoning crystal. As the crystal responded, numerous divine figures appeared in the sky, all waiting to be chosen. Among them, some spectators noticed the image of Shiva. Excitement quickly filled Sindhu when they saw the holy sun awaken him. They even kneel and worship fervently, longing to witness their great god. Meanwhile, Bill and Yuan grew tense since Shiva was one of the principal gods of Sindhu. Bill clenched his teeth, saying Shiva's power placed him among supreme gods. The citizens of Shia also knew Shiva's strength, so Yana wondered how Chen would respond. After a while, Chen stood before Sindhu's summoned gods Shiva, Numan, and Pang. Meanwhile, the holy sun respectfully invited Shiva to step forward, yet Shiva dismissed the gesture, saying that he already knew his master. Soon after, Eris re-emerged to honor the audience for witnessing Sindhu's god King Shiva. After that, she finally declared the battle between Shia and Sindhu had begun. She also reminded everyone that the battle mode was the god-demon group fight. When the announcement ended, Shiva told the other gods to move first, and they agreed. They quickly charged forward without hesitation. Earl saw this and told Alo and Hyun to fight the two while he faced Shiva. In the next moment, Numan appeared directly above Alo. Alo then advances, believing he can defeat him, who merely looks like just his senior. With that, he struck Numan and loudly declared that he would be his opponent. Numan raised his staff, which transformed into a massive pillar. He slammed the pillar down, shattering the ground beneath Alo, but his face suddenly shifted to alarm as he looked down. He saw two dragons appear and were rushing toward him. The sudden attack even sent him flying backward. So after landing, he questioned Alo's immense power despite being small. Alo replied his seniors had taught him all their techniques on the westward journey. Thus, a false god like Numan could never match him. At the mention of Alo's senior, Numan asked if he claimed they looked alike. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, Hyun looked at Pung and thought he was a tasty meat.